Hi guys, I'm bringing another video from the Rock of Gibraltar. Right now I'm standing right next to a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean on the east side of the rock, and I'm actually standing inside the original Great Siege tunnels from the 18th century. So I thought I'd tell you a bit about these tunnels and their historical significance. So these were the very first tunnels ever dug in Gibraltar from 1779 to 1783 during the Great Siege, when France and Spain jointly laid siege to Gibraltar during the American Revolutionary War. So in June 1779, Spain declared war on Great Britain after France had already declared war following the Battle of Saratoga in North America. And in July, both the French and Spanish forces began the Great Siege, which would go on to last 3.5 years, and is still to this day considered the longest military siege ever endured by British forces. At the time of the siege, Gibraltar was garrisoned by troops from the British mainland and from the Crown Protectorate of Hanover, which is now part of modern-day Germany, because at the time the British monarch was also the head of state in Hanover, as that was where King George I came from, and his grandson King George III was the monarch at the time of the Revolutionary War in America. So the tunnelling was undertaken by the Royal Engineers, and this was really their baptism of fire, if you will. This was the first large-scale tunnelling operation they had really been assigned to. So this was sort of their chance to prove themselves. And during the siege, they did such a good job with the tunnelling that the Royal Engineers have since been involved in every tunnelling operation and every digging operation in general in Gibraltar since then. So whenever there's been any kind of digging operation militarily in Gibraltar, the Royal Engineers are always the first they turn to. So here you can get another view of the outside world, the Mediterranean right there, and the airfield tunnel underneath. So during the siege, the French and Spanish tried everything they could, including bombardments, blockade, starvation, skirmishes, anything to break the will or the morale of the British and Hanoverian defenders. However, the defending forces very stubbornly held out, and because of their determination, Gibraltar remains in British hands to this day. Along with the tunnelling operation itself, along with the tunnelling operation itself, there were also many military innovations that came in like gunnery form, like with the cannons and how they were used. For example, there was because the cannons were located so high on the north face of the rock, they couldn't shoot towards the Spanish lines. They couldn't aim at the Spanish lines if they were pointed at a normal angle like this. So the cannons had to be sloped downwards so that they were literally facing down the north face of the rock so that they could shoot down towards the Spanish trenches. That was the only way they could hit anything. And that innovation was later dubbed the depression gun. And another military innovation that came from the Great Siege was the red hot shot. A French admiral called d'Arçon had come up with his own military innovation, which would strengthen the hull of his ships, the wooden hulls on the outside of the ship. So conventional cannonballs would basically bounce off the sides of the French and Spanish ships. They were completely ineffective. So to counter these new ships, the defending forces basically superheated their cannonballs until they were red hot, hence the name red hot shot. And then they'd stuff them down the cannons, and then they'd shoot them towards the enemy ships. And rather than trying to penetrate the ships, they would set them alight. They would set them on fire. So even though the French and Spanish had come up with a method to deflect regular cannon shots, they couldn't counter the red hot shot that would set their ships on fire. You can see an example here of someone heating up a cannonball in an 18th century furnace. And a bit further up you'll see an example of a depressing cannon. Well, this isn't one of them, but this is the sort of cannon they would have used during the Great Siege. So pointed at that kind of angle, they couldn't hit the Spanish lines because they were too far down. And well, as well as the military threat, the people of Gibraltar also had to contend with disease and starvation as well. Rather unfortunately, there was an outbreak of smallpox in Gibraltar right around the same time of the siege, which also took quite a few lives. And because of a lack of fruit and goods like lemons, there was also an outbreak of scurvy as well, which is commonly known as the disease of sailors. and there was also a strict rationing system imposed by Governor George Augustus Eliot, who led the territory during the siege. And this rationing system rationed everything from food to powder to water. Everything that either a civilian or a soldier could consume had to be rationed. And here is an example of one of the depression guns. So you can see another image here of a gun depression carriage facing directly down the north side of the rock. Anyway, so along with the commodities that were rationed was, of course, alcohol, because anyone who's been in the military will know that soldiers and sailors very often like to dabble in a bit of drink in their spare time. But because there was a strict rationing system imposed, the alcohol also had to be rationed, but many civilians would stock ample supply of barrels of alcohol in their homes and in their cellars. So when the British soldiers, when the thirsty British soldiers broke into some of the civilians' homes to search what they had and found the ample supply of alcohol, they began a drinking frenzy, and discipline and cohesion among the troops completely broke down. So Eliot had to order the Hanoverian soldiers also stationed on the rock to arrest all the soldiers who had participated in this drinking frenzy and restore order to the British lines. This resulted in many of the soldiers being imprisoned or hung by the Hanoverians for their misconduct. Although these punishments would vary depending on which regiment you were in, and a lot of the time the punishments weren't very consistent. For example, one man who deserted from his post was readmitted with no punishment after he later returned, and one man who was caught stealing was hung by his regiment after he had been caught. And sometimes it would be the other way around as well. So nobody really knew what kind of punishment they would get if they were caught. So right now I'm standing next to another gun here with two soldiers. And down here you'll find the area where the very first cannon was placed during the Great Siege. I have to duck my head a lot going through here. So this right here, this is a replica cannon obviously, but this general area of the tunnel is where the very first cannon was placed inside the rock. So right now we are nearing the end of the tunnel. So obviously the French and Spanish forces weren't successful in their attempts to take Gibraltar, and despite losing the war as a whole, with Britain having to give up other territories such as East Florida and Majorca to the Spanish, Gibraltar is still in British hands to this day, because despite winning the war overall, the Spanish could not manage to retake Gibraltar. So I hope you learned something new in this video, and hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.